Hey guys, it's Chris Jones for episode 26 of Beyond Local. I am sitting here with a very familiar face, our Vice President of Search at LSEO.com, Kyle Cozy. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to chat about one of the most important topics in the SEO space, on-page or on-site SEO. And so for folks that are watching, when you take the beginner courses on SEO, they really kind of bucket it into on-site SEO and off-site SEO. Off-site SEO being link building and other signals that are being sent back to your website. But on-page SEO is what, Kyle Cozy?
On-page SEO is controlling your SEO at the page level. So it's making sure all of your landing pages across your website are set up properly for SEO. So just like you said, there's on-page SEO and then there's off-site SEO. The place you should start is on-page because it's what you can control. We're going to get into the different elements later on, but it's controlling where the keywords are. Are you optimizing for the correct keywords? Are you setting it up properly? Is it user-friendly? All of that stuff. And again, the difference is off-site. If you Google SEO, it's going to tell you, oh, do link building and all this other type of stuff. But before you even get to that, you got to make sure on-site's right, because you could do all the off-site SEO you want. If you don't get the on-page stuff right, it's not going to matter.
So this is it's a very common neglected area of SEO. As you were talking there, I was thinking mostly for small businesses, because small businesses are looking for automated solutions. They don't have much time on their hands, so they're big fans of like the Yoast SEO plugin. But the Yoast SEO plugin could be automated, but you have to set it up properly, etc. You had started to get into why you think it's important. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that when we think about the three primary ranking factors, links are really a measure of authority, content, and then Google's machine learning, right? Their rank brain. That's really what we're talking about here. Is it true that, because I want to ask you, why is it important? But is it important because this is probably the area where Google has gotten the smartest? Can they actually record or assess things like time on site and stuff like that? So how important is on site?
Yeah, it's super important because we know Google is smarter than your average human. They want to understand a web page or a website how a user would. So they go in, crawl that page, and you may think they're crawling all this code and spidering all this code and just looking at that stuff, but that's not all they're looking at. They're looking at it exactly how you, as a user, would go to a website on your desktop, on your computer screen, how the page lays out, how are you going to read it. That's how Google's trying to understand a page, and that's why this stuff is so important.
Awesome. All right, Google's trying to replicate what would be the user experience, right? They want to provide their rankings based on the relevance of those rankings to the keyword that triggers the search results. Okay, so someone types in a keyword on Google. And by the way, this is all organic search we're talking about here, search engine optimization. So they type in a keyword on Google, they click the listing, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're on site, right? So what are some of the main elements of on-page SEO that an SEO would be looking to optimize?
Yeah, so I wrote this article, and it sort of displays as a checklist the things you should be looking at, your on-page elements. And the first two things I listed were URL structure and your meta title and your meta description. I kind of made those interchangeable as like 1A, 1B, but is one more important than the other? I'm not so sure. They're both very important. That's why I listed them as like 1A, 1B. The first place to start is your URL structure. So when you're setting up a site or you want to set it up for SEO on the pages, the first thing you should do is keyword research before you even set some of those URLs. And let's say that you already have the site built, you have the URL structure, but you're not ranking yet. It's not too late to change your URL. Some things you want to keep in mind there is making sure the URL is short and concise. You don't want this long URL that gets cut off or truncated on the screen. And like I said, do the keyword research, because then you're giving yourself the opportunity to put the keyword right in the URL And it's one of the first things Google will read along with your meta title and description. So getting the keyword in your URL, your meta title, and then the description with a call to action is one of the most important things you can do, because that's one of the first things Google reads at the top of the source code is what keywords you're using in the URL of the page, and then the meta title and description, which also sits in the header of your website. So making sure that you do that keyword research, optimize the URL, the title, description with the keyword. You're telling Google right off the bat, here's what the page is about.
So awesome. So let's rewind for just a second, because you mentioned keyword research. So with regard to your on-site optimization, how important is keyword research, or is it like the almighty as it relates to the content that you're creating, the URLs that you're optimizing, the meta tags and meta descriptions that you're optimizing?
Yeah, I think it's the almighty. It helps you with all the other elements, and we might get to some of them. It helps you optimize those. If you don't do the keyword research first, you're gonna struggle doing this, or it's gonna be a lot more time consuming if you're trying to do the keyword research for every page as you do this. So having that keyword bank, or that list of keywords that you want to optimize for, when you're going to do on-page SEO, it's easier to map up the keywords to the landing page on your website of which keyword goes where, because again, you don't want to cannibalize your own rankings. You don't want multiple pages going after the same keyword. So doing that keyword research, like I said, allows you to map up to the landing page you want to optimize for, and then the rest is easy, just making sure you have all these elements in place.
Each page, I've always said, Google doesn't rank websites, it ranks web pages. So when we're thinking about increasing the amount of keywords we rank for, if we're trying to push up a specific ranking that we have, it's really at the page level.
Yep.
Do you agree with that each page, should have a limited number of keywords that you're trying to rank it for, 1 or 2 at most, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's 1, right? You don't want to confuse Google as to which keyword it should rank the page for. But one thing to keep in mind there is, if you want to rank the page for one keyword, there's different ways to say that keyword, right? Think of them as synonyms. Mm-hmm. So you want to optimize a page for one keyword, but also all of its synonyms, or different ways people search for something. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, like how to tie your shoe. There's multiple ways to say that. How to tie my shoe, how to tie a specific knot for a shoe, things like that. It's just optimizing for the different keywords or the different ways people search for that type of thing.
Yeah, I talk about this in SEO Visual Blueprint, my book, and I kind of give Bruce Clay credit for not coming up with the concept, but popularizing the idea of latent semantic meaning. And in my book, I use, because I'm an Eagles fan, I thought you were going to go there since you're a Raiders fan. Instead, you took tying shoes. But I hate to say this, Carson Wentz, because he's been benched. But Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz, and what's the coach's name? Coach
Doug Peterson.
Yeah, Coach Peterson,
yeah,
are all related to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Exactly.
So, if you're trying to rank the Philadelphia Eagles, it's appropriate to put in similar meaning, or intent, keywords. Yeah. So one other quick thing on this. So often people will have built a robust website, lots of pages of content, and they didn't use, the content creation wasn't driven by keyword research. So how do you handle that? Do you go back in and re-optimize, rewrite the content? How do you handle that when a client comes into LSEO and they have, dozens or hundreds or even thousands of pages of content that really, wasn't written in a particular way?
Yeah, and that's one of the elements listed is the content, the actual content on the page. Again, you don't actually see the meta title and description when you're on the page. So that's why the on-page content is also important, because Google reads that as well, and then the user sees it. But again, we're talking about how to get your web pages ranked with on-page SEO. So the content is super important. You got to make sure, just like you mentioned, getting the keyword within the content a few times. Again, you don't want to overdo it or stuff it with a particular keyword, but getting those semantic keywords in there Like you said, that was an even better example than I could give. And just making sure it's optimized from that standpoint, using the synonyms of the keywords and then also the related keywords. So like your example, the Eagles, you want to make sure that you're also talking about Carson Wentz, Miles Sanders, Doug Peterson, because those are all related, and that's going to give Google the signal like, okay, they get it. This page gets it. It's talking about all the related keywords. So let's rank it for all you need to know about the Philadelphia Eagles, you know?
Sure. So let's go through some additional elements of on-page SEO. You said that URL structure and meta, title, and description were kind of like your 1A, 1B. What are some others?
Yeah, so again, your heading structure fits in there as well. And that kind of ties into what we just talked about, the on-page content, because your headings are part of the on-page content. So that's kind of number 3. And number 4 for me is just making sure that your headings and your on-page content are optimized with the keywords, semantic keywords, synonyms of the keyword, and making sure that you have the headers properly set up. So you want an H1 at the top of the page that says what you want to rank the page for. Again, think of it as we talked about the title and URL. You want the main keyword to be part of your H1 in some way. It doesn't have to just be the H1 term, but adding some think of it, if you're writing a paper for school, you want to make sure that you create an engaging headline or a topic. That's the same thing you want to do for the H1, but just make sure the keyword's in there. And then the structure should follow with your H2s, your H3s. You could have multiple H2s and multiple H3s, but if you want to have subsections under one of the H2s, make sure they're in H3s, and so on. Just follow that structure. You could go all the way up to an H6.
I think the most important thing at a high level is just consistency.
Yep.
You know, I think where the content lacks optimization is when it's inconsistent. Like there wasn't clarity in what the post was or the page was supposed to be about in the first place. And so if you go into it with a clear intent that you want to attempt to rank this page for this particular keyword or keyword string, getting it in the title tag, in the meta description, and now to your point on heading structure in the H1 or the H2, you know, is going to be the thing that gives you your best shot at communicating to Google's machine that the page is about a certain thing.
Yeah, and there's a ton of on-page graders or tools out there that you could use to, when you write this content or optimize the content, plug it into the tool and it'll score your SEO. We like to use SEM rushes just because we already have a subscription. There's a content checker in there. It'll grade you. Is it good? Is it mediocre? Or is it bad? Obviously, you want to shoot for that green good score, but use those to your benefit.
Sure. What else? I know you talk in your post about images and media and stuff like that. Is the so talk to us about the technical elements of that, alt image attributes and stuff or whatever. But also, what are we really getting at when we're trying to enhance the quality of the content? Right.
Yep. Again, user experience. It comes back to that. You want to make sure that you break your content up with images or even videos, and just make sure that you're giving the user that aspect, that engagement, that they could understand what you're talking about, and then breaking it up, because they don't just want to see one big blurb of text. They don't want to read that. They want to see images or GIFs even, and like I said, videos. Break it up with that. And again, we could get into some of the technical aspects, like making sure the keywords that you use in the alt text or the image file name matches the keyword or similar to the keyword that you're trying to rank the page for. But again, it's all about user experience. The same way we're shooting these podcasts, we're going to use the video to our benefit and put it in a blog post. It breaks up the content or gives the user another way to kind of digest the content.
Sure. And, you know, one of the core sort of metrics that Google is looking at is how long. I was just talking to our VP of sales upstairs, and I said, you know, someone goes to Google, they click on the listing, and, you know, how long are they going to spend on your page? If it's an instant bounce, that information is going back to Google. So if you're ranked number 3, it's saying to Google, bounce is not relevant. What's happening? You're moving down in the search engine results. However, if they end up staying there or engaging with the page, you're kind of locking in your position and maybe even communicating with Google's algorithm that wow, this page is super relevant. You know, they're coming to the page, they're watching video, they're engaging with it. So when we kicked off the podcast, we differentiated between on-site and off-site. You know, at the end of the day, you know, building in links or earning links to these specific pages will increase the likelihood that those pages will rank for the keywords that they were optimized for. But I know in your post that's on the LSEO blog, you talk about internal linking. And I think this is one of the most underutilized strategies across the board for on-site optimization. So can you talk to us a little bit about why it's important and what is internal linking?
Yeah, sure. So you want to create that hierarchy on your website. So take for example this LSEO example, right? We want to rank for SEO. So a way to do that is to create related topics on our website about SEO. So here's an example. On page SEO, I created a checklist, and we're going to make sure that the internal links in this article link back to our main SEO pages, whether it be technical SEO or just our SEO consulting services page. That tells Google that they're relatable, and our top level page that obviously we want to rank for SEO consulting services. It's our go-to. It's our money term. That's going to give it pass some authority on our website to say, all right, they're really a company that focuses on SEO or SEO consulting, and all the other different types of SEO as well. But it depends on which top level page we link back to. We're going to tell Google, all right, that's their main page, but this is just a sub part or a subsection of that, you know? So that's why internal linking is so important. It passes page authority to other pages on your website, especially your most important pages.
It's awesome. So if we reverse and we say our recommendation is that all of this needs to be driven by really high quality keyword research. We don't have like an indefinite amount of keywords that we want to rank a website for. It's a limited number. It could be a lot, but generally speaking, it's in the dozens, you know, maybe 100 keywords, right? So let's call those keywords your kind of keyword bank. Not all keywords are created equal. The ones that have commercial intent and the ones more likely to result in a conversion are probably at the top of that list. All right, so you have your keyword bank. I think internal linking should be driven by that bank. And when the content is being created, whenever there's a reference to, say, in our case, SEO services, we should be linking back to that SEO services, the most authoritative page on our website for SEO services, if content marketing or whatever it is. So for people that are watching, you know, depending on what your business is, you should have this bank of keywords, and they should be prioritized. You should always be looking for opportunities to hyperlink those internally back to the pages that are most relevant for them, correct?
Yeah, and when Google crawls a site, that's one of the things they look at is how many times is that page linked to on your website. So if your SEO services page or our SEO services page has the most internal links, that gives Google the sense of, okay, that's a priority when they come and crawl a website.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Google's a machine, it's not a person. So, you know, you're giving the machine information to kind of synthesize and then determine where you should rank. So I think internal linking is huge. And the other thing is, since the beginning of Google, there's been a lot of discussion about how authority passes through your website, you know, your top level domain and through it. But the truth is it's distributed. How it's distributed, I'm not sure we know scientifically to any exact amount, but we do know it's distributed. So therefore, being able to latch on to some of that homepage authority, which is going to likely be your most authoritative page from an objective ranking. One final thing I'll say before we kind of finish up these last couple of points from your LSEO blog post is that, so you have 100 target keywords. Mm-hmm. What are the 10 that are like your dream keywords? I have been thinking about this and I've advised clients on it for many years. I call it sort of like a keyword cloud. So if you look at travel websites, this is probably one of the better examples because they all do it. Yeah. Go to Travelocity or Expedia's homepage and you'll see what I'm talking about. These keyword clouds are the keywords that they want to rank for.
Yep.
New York City hotels, JFK shuttle services, whatever it might be. And, your internal linking strategy can include this as a subset of your strategy. And the 10 keywords or so that you come up with, you could put in a footer, as part of your navigational structure. You could put it on your homepage, and there's other ways to do it. So internal linking is, there's a lot that could be done with it to really send the signals to Google about what you, as the website owner, believe are the most important keywords for the website. So we talked about internal and external linking. You and I probably 6 to 10 podcasts ago talked about schema markup, and it was one of my favorite podcasts. So give the viewers and listeners a quick recap on what schema markup is and why it's important to the topic of on-page SEO.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail. Obviously, you could go back and watch that previous episode. But at a high level, again, schema markup, it helps Google understand the page. Even more information about the page, like let's say one of our service pages had reviews on it of what customers thought about it. We could mark that stuff up with schema markup, and it'll give Google a sense of, okay, this has 30 5-star reviews. People like this. And that'll help them. Again, it'll richen the search results, but from an on-page SEO perspective, it just helps Google understand the page a little bit more, or even further information about it that they wouldn't necessarily pick up from the source code or from just looking at the page. Again, we have to provide Google some sense of context. Again, they want to see the page as a human does, but they're still a machine, so they crawl it as a machine or as a spider. So schema markup and having that snippet of code in the landing page is going to help Google understand the page a little bit more. Like I said, reviews, or maybe we have a certain pricing structure for our SEO. Marking all that up with schema helps Google understand it a little bit better.
And just to be clear, from the search user point of view, this is when they type in a keyword onto Google and the listing seems to be enhanced. Mm-hmm. So they have, to your point, reviews or maybe price ranges or, those kind of things. So at the end of the day, what it will do, if you do it effectively, is drive up click-through rate, which is a primary metric that Google is looking for to determine relevance. So the more people who click your listing, again, you got to keep them there once they click it, but the more people who click it, the more likely it is that Google is going to conclude that you're relevant for that listing. That's why schema markup is so important.
Yeah,
correct?
Exactly. And just so people don't get confused, you're not going to see schema markup actually on the page, but it still makes the on-page SEO checklist because you could control it at the page level. Same way with title and description. You're not going to see that on the page, but you're going to see it in the search results. And you could control it at the page level. So that's why it makes the checklist.
So the final two things that you cover are hugely important. And another, for website owners that have dated websites, yep, this is a killer. For websites that are slow, that have images that aren't compressed, et cetera. So those two things are page speed and mobile friendliness. So can you speak to those two things?
Yeah, again, and I think this kind of ties back to what you mentioned before, is Google's tracking how people are engaging with your site. How long are they staying there, or are they bouncing? So if you have a page that's loading slowly, they're just going to bounce and go find a competitor or a different result because yours didn't load on their screen. Same thing with it being mobile friendly. Over 60-70% of traffic nowadays to websites come from a smartphone or a mobile device. So if it's not mobile friendly or displaying properly on a smartphone, they're going to bounce and go find another result that does. So having those two things set up with the right page speed, and there's no right or wrong answer, but the proper page speed, fast page speed, or load time, and then just making sure it displays properly on a mobile device is huge, because then you're at least giving users a shot to stick around. Then it comes back to whether they like your content or not. But don't fail right from the start. Make sure it's fast, make sure it's loading, and make sure it's mobile friendly, because that's likely where the user's reading it on their smartphone. So take the opportunity, make sure that stuff's right, to even try to get them in the door. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of try and knock, but then just leave.
Does your post include a checklist?
Yeah.
So in conclusion, on-site SEO is one of those things, for those of you that are listening or watching it, it seems like there's a ton, and it's very easy to miss things. So I personally advise to use the checklist approach. Think of each page of your content as having an opportunity to rank. And if you could score roughly an 80 to 100% on your on-page checklist, you're gonna do really well. The key is consistency, and not to do it just from memory, but to actually hold yourself accountable. So whoever's writing your content, train them on these on-site factors, have them watch this podcast and do some Google searches on other resources. But at the end of the day, use the checklist approach, because that's going to give you the best opportunity to not miss something silly. And it happens all the time where we'll take on a website that has, a big team and sophistication, and we find, duplicate title tags, duplicate meta descriptions, poor URL structure. One other thing, and I was about to end the podcast, but I see this all the time. Website owners who get confused on where to put a part of their business, so they use like a URL, a subdomain.
Yeah.
And so do you have any any sense on that? Should it be avoided? How should people think about subdomains?
I think it depends on how large the site is. Typically, I like to advise people to just keep it all under one domain. But if you think about it, like colleges and universities, how large those sites are and how many sections of a university there are, like admissions, there's tuition and student life and all that stuff. So they kind of have to set up that content on subdomains, because all of that living under one domain kind of just taps into your crawl budget. But if you don't have an overly large site, I would typically just stick under the main domain or the top level domain, and create subfolders. Again, that's important in the URL structure, just making sure that you follow a structure. So if we're talking about SEO services and then we want to talk about audits, technical SEO, link building, content, we want all of that to live under /SEO services /SEO audits. That also gives Google a sense of, all right, here's the main keyword they're trying to go after, and here's all the subsets of it. So to that point, URL structure, I would try to stay away from subdomains unless you have no choice.
I agree with that. Awesome. We will see you guys for episode 27 next time.